She was expecting to find the man who turned her college time into all-out war. There's a moment when you think you've finally escaped your past. When years of grinding, proving yourself, swallowing disrespect, and surviving unfair judgment finally seem worth it. When you walk into a room believing this is the beginning of your future. And then you see him. The man who once turned your college years into an all-out war. The man you never wanted to face again. And now, he's the one holding your career in his hands. The corporate waiting room of Harrington Developments smelled like fresh coffee, polished marble, and ambition sharpened to a blade. Everything about the space screamed power. Glass walls, steel accents, panoramic windows overlooking the city like a throne room for modern kings. Elena Carter adjusted her beige blazer for the third time in under 5 minutes, a nervous habit she hated but couldn't stop. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, composed on the surface, but her eyes betrayed everything she refused to say out loud. This contract could change her life. After 5 years of being underestimated in an industry dominated by men twice her age with egos twice as large, this was finally her chance. The Riverside Urban Renewal Project wasn't just prestigious, it was historic. Multi-million-dollar funding. Government attention. Media coverage. The kind of project that could launch a consultant's career into the stratosphere. Elena had prepared obsessively. Weeks of research. Sleepless nights. Entire presentations rewritten at 3 a.m. because one data point didn't feel airtight enough. She had walked into mayoral offices and boardrooms full of skeptics before. She had survived worse than this. What she hadn't prepared for was him. Miss Carter? The assistant appeared, immaculate and polite, holding a tablet like a shield. Mr. Harrington will see you now. Elena exhaled slowly, gripping her leather portfolio, worn, familiar, grounding. A gift from her mother the day she graduated college. Back when she still believed hard work alone was enough. She followed the assistant down a corridor lined with photographs of architectural triumphs. Skyscrapers. Urban transformations. Entire neighborhoods reborn. Every image whispered the same message. Control, dominance, legacy. She told herself to breathe. She told herself she was ready. The conference room door opened. And the world tilted. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe memory had softened the edges over time. Broad shoulders wrapped in a charcoal suit that looked custom-built for authority. A jawline sharp enough to cut glass. And those eyes. Those dark, steady eyes that once burned holes through her across lecture halls and library tables. Daniel Harrington. Her worst rival. Her sharpest critic. The man who made her college life hell. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Daniel stood frozen mid-step, a folder hovering in his hand like gravity had forgotten its job. His expression shifted, shock, disbelief, and then something darker, unreadable. Elena felt her stomach drop. She swallowed hard. 10 years. 10 years since graduation. 10 years since she'd last seen him at the ceremony where they'd stood on opposite sides of the auditorium, both top of their class, pretending the other didn't exist. And now he was here. In charge. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally Daniel spoke. You. One word. Loaded. Dangerous. Heavy with history. Elena straightened her spine, lifting her chin even as her heart pounded like a war drum. She forced a smile. Sweet, controlled, lethal. Unfortunately, she said calmly, yes. You. The executives seated around the table exchanged confused glances. The assistant cleared her throat awkwardly. Daniel closed the door with a soft click that sounded far too much like a verdict. He walked to the head of the table with measured steps, every movement screaming authority. He placed the folder down, then finally looked directly at her. Ladies and gentlemen, he said smoothly, this is Elena Carter. Our new sustainability consultant. The word consultant sounded professional on the surface, but Elena heard the blade hidden underneath. We've worked together before, Daniel added. That's a generous choice of words, Elena muttered under her breath. Unfortunately, the room was quiet enough for everyone to hear. Daniel raised an eyebrow, that familiar gesture that once meant challenge accepted. Did you say something, Miss Carter? She met his gaze without flinching. Just that I'm eager to begin. I trust we'll keep things professional, despite the past. Oh, I'm sure we will, Daniel replied, folding his hands. After all, you signed a 6-month contract. Plenty of time to work closely. The way he said closely made something coil in her stomach. Elena took the seat farthest from him and opened her tablet with hands she refused to let shake. Let's begin. The next 90 minutes felt like a battlefield disguised as a board meeting. Elena presented her vision with precision, green infrastructure, solar-integrated facades, water harvesting systems, long-term cost efficiency paired with environmental responsibility. She spoke with passion grounded in data, conviction backed by proof. Daniel listened. He interrupted her 3 times. Each question was sharp, technical, designed to test, not understand. She answered every one without hesitation. When the meeting ended, the executives filtered out, murmuring among themselves. Elena packed slowly, acutely aware that Daniel hadn't moved from his place by the window. "I didn't know it was you," she said finally, breaking the silence. Daniel turned. "Neither did I. If you had, you wouldn't have accepted," he finished. She met his gaze. "I need this project." "So do I." There was a beat. "Well," he said quietly, stepping closer, "looks like we're stuck with each other." She forced a nod. "Looks like it." He extended his hand, formal, controlled. She shook it, brief, firm, ignoring the electric jolt that shot up her arm. When Elena left that room, one truth settled heavily in her chest. The next 6 months would either make her career or destroy it. Daniel Harrington prided himself on control. He had built his empire on planning, discipline, and emotional restraint. At 38, every decision he made was calculated, every risk measured. So why was he standing alone in his conference room 5 minutes later, staring at the door like a man who'd just seen a ghost? Elena Carter. 10 years. 10 years since the woman who challenged him like no one else had vanished from his life. He had assumed, foolishly, that fate would never drag her back into his orbit. And now she worked for him. Technically, she was an external consultant. Practically, she would be everywhere. Correcting him. Questioning him. Looking at him with those eyes that always seemed to see straight through the armor he worked so hard to maintain. His phone buzzed. "Tom, just saw the new consultant leaving your office. Why did you look like you'd seen a ghost?" Daniel ignored the message. Down the hall, Marina Wells, interior designer and professional hurricane, intercepted him. "Boss," she said brightly, then squinted at him. "Wait, what happened to you?" "Nothing. You look shaken." "I don't get shaken." Marina grinned. "You met Elena, didn't you?" Daniel stiffened. "Drop it." "Oh, I won't," Marina said cheerfully. "This just got interesting." That night, Daniel reviewed Elena's proposal in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city. And as much as it irritated him to admit it, it was brilliant. Every argument anticipated. Every risk mitigated. Every solution elegant. Exactly as she'd always been. He remembered the library nights. The silent competition. The stolen glances. The way rivalry had blurred into something else before everything exploded. The incident. The accusation. The distance. He had never asked her what really happened. He had simply assumed. Because it was easier. Across the city, Elena lay on her couch, a glass of red wine in hand, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed. "Marina, so, your new boss is that Daniel Harrington?" Elena groaned. "Yes." "Oh my God. Enemies to lovers energy is off the charts." "It's not a romance," Elena snapped. "It's a professional disaster." Marina smiled knowingly. "Sure it is." Elena closed her eyes. Because deep down she knew one thing for certain. The war she thought she'd left behind had just begun again. The war gets personal. Monday morning hit like a slap. Elena arrived early like she always did, because she'd learned the hard way that being good wasn't enough in a world that loved to doubt women. You had to be early, prepared, overqualified, perfect. And even then you still had to fight for oxygen in the room. The office floors of Harrington Developments were quiet at 7:12 a.m., the kind of silence that made every heel tap sound like a confession. Elena walked with purpose, clutching her portfolio like armor, telling herself she wasn't intimidated by the glossy glass walls or the men in tailored suits who always looked like they were born entitled. She was here because she earned it. She reached the temporary desk the company had assigned her, small, tucked near a corner like an afterthought, and stopped. A cup of coffee sat there, steaming. Not just any coffee. Caramel sweetener. Extra foam. Cinnamon dusting. Her stomach tightened. It was exactly how she drank it in college during late-night study marathons. Elena looked around, half expecting someone to jump out with a camera. Nobody was there. Just the security guard nodding at her from the lobby and the hum of the building waking up. She stared at the cup like it might bite her. Then she looked toward Daniel's office. The glass door was closed, blinds half open, and she could see him inside, already on a call, posture straight, expression unreadable. He didn't look at her. But Elena had always been good at reading him. Too good. He knew she'd noticed. Her first instinct was anger. Her second was suspicion. Was this a power move? A reminder that he remembered more than he should? A way to destabilize her before she even started? Elena sat down, opened her laptop, and refused to touch the coffee for 5 full minutes out of sheer stubbornness. Then her stomach growled. She took a sip. And hatefully, humiliatingly, her body relaxed like she'd just been given permission to breathe. It was perfect. That's ridiculous, she whispered to herself. This is ridiculous. But she didn't throw it away. She drank it. Every drop. Because a small, traitorous part of her liked that he remembered. And that made her furious. The first week became a strange rhythm. Every morning, Elena arrived early. Every morning, Daniel arrived earlier. He passed her desk with a crisp, "Good morning, Miss Carter," voice professional, eyes neutral. And every morning the coffee appeared. Not a note. Not an explanation. Just the cup, like a quiet, consistent act of war. By Thursday, Elena had enough. If Daniel wanted to play subtle psychological games, she could play too. That afternoon, she walked into the boutique bakery across the street, bought a small white box, and carefully selected what she remembered Daniel used to inhale during college exams. Chocolate croissants. Flaky, rich, messy, impossible to eat without getting crumbs everywhere. Exactly the kind of thing Daniel hated because it disrupted his perfect image. She carried the box into the office like a gift wrapped in defiance. When Daniel stepped out to grab documents from his assistant, he paused. The box sat on his pristine desk like an insult with frosting. Daniel stared at it. Then, slowly, he opened it. His expression didn't change much. But Elena saw it, the tiniest curve of his mouth. The smallest crack in that disciplined mask. A smile. He shut the box, glanced through the glass toward her desk. Elena didn't look away. She lifted her chin like a queen. The smile vanished. The war resumed. But something had shifted. Something dangerously close to understanding. And understanding was always the first step toward losing control. The next day, the project team gathered for the main coordination meeting in the large presentation room. Architects, engineers, designers, budget analysts, 12 people around a long table with screens on every wall. This was where Elena expected to shine. This was where she expected logic and expertise to matter. Instead, it became the first battlefield. The lead architect, a charismatic man named Grant Holloway, clicked through updated visuals of the Riverside renewal design. New rooftop spaces. Updated facade angles. Repositioned solar panels. Elena watched, taking notes. Then she saw it. A technical misalignment in the solar panel tilt on the east-facing structure. It wasn't a small mistake. It was the kind of mistake that could silently cost the project millions over time. Elena raised her hand. "Sorry," she said politely, voice calm. "That tilt angle isn't optimal. You're losing efficiency." The room shifted. Grant blinked. "Excuse me?" Elena stood, walking closer to the projection. "If the panels remain at 40 degrees on the east-facing facade, you'll lose approximately 10 to 12% efficiency based on seasonal position. 35 degrees is the correct tilt." Before anyone could respond, a low sound came from Daniel's side of the table. Tap, tap, tap. His fingers on the tabletop. That old habit. The one he had in college when he was deciding how to strike. Daniel leaned back slightly. 40 degrees is required for structural distribution. Changing it compromises load balance. Elena met his eyes. The structural calculation is wrong. A silence fell like a guillotine. The engineer beside Daniel, a young man with restless energy and expensive confidence, straightened sharply. His name tag read Thomas Harrington. Elena's heartbeat stuttered. "Harrington?" Thomas looked at her like she'd just insulted his bloodline. "You're questioning my work?" he asked. Elena didn't blink. "I'm questioning the math, not you." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Thomas has a master's degree from MIT. Elena nodded. "And I have a doctorate in sustainable systems from Cambridge. Do we want to list credentials, or do we want to fix the problem?" A few people coughed. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Grant looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Daniel stood, slow and controlled. "All right," he said. "Prove it." Elena hesitated for half a second. Not because she doubted herself. Because she hadn't expected him to give her the stage so quickly. Daniel gestured toward the digital board. "Now, convince me." Elena stepped forward, pulled up her simulation files and began. For 20 minutes, she broke the problem apart like a surgeon. She showed the load distributions, the alternative reinforcement placement, the efficiency outcomes, the long-term cost reductions. She didn't just argue. She demonstrated. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. Thomas stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. Daniel studied the numbers. Then slowly he nodded. "She's right," Daniel said. The relief in the room was immediate, like everyone had been holding their breath and didn't know it. "Update the design tilt to 35, Daniel ordered. "And adjust reinforcement according to her solution." Elena froze, surprised. She had expected a fight. An ego flare. Resistance. Not acceptance. Thomas's face tightened, but he didn't argue. The meeting ended with people quietly filing out, murmuring under their breath. Elena packed her things slowly. Daniel did the same. When the last person left, the door clicked shut. They were alone. Elena turned slightly. "I didn't think you'd accept that." Daniel glanced up. "Why not?" She gave him a thin smile. "Because you're not known for being wrong." His mouth twitched. "And you're not known for being gentle." Elena snorted softly. "Fair." Daniel walked around the table, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head to look at him. "You did good work," he said. Elena didn't know why that sentence hit her like it did, but something in her chest tightened anyway. "Thank you." Daniel's eyes held hers, steady, searching, like he was looking for something he lost years ago. Then he spoke quietly, dangerously. "I never really believed you sabotaged me." Elena's throat went dry. "That's funny." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because you acted like you did." Daniel's jaw flexed. For a moment, the powerful executive faded and the stubborn college boy flickered through. "I was younger," he said, voice lower. "And stupid." Elena's hands clenched at her sides. "You didn't even ask me." Daniel's eyes darkened. "I know." Elena forced herself to laugh, but it came out hollow. "So what? You just decided I was guilty because it was convenient?" Daniel took one step closer. "Because it was easier than admitting the truth," he said. Elena's pulse spiked. "What truth?" Daniel hesitated. For the first time since she'd seen him again, his control slipped. Just a fraction. His eyes moved over her face like he was memorizing her again. Then his phone buzzed loudly on the table. The moment shattered. Daniel looked at the screen, cursed under his breath, and stepped back like he'd been burned. "I have to take this," he said sharply. Elena swallowed. "Of course." Daniel paused at the door and looked back. "Elena," he said softly. It was the first time in 10 years he'd said her name without a title. She looked up. His expression was strained, like he was fighting himself. "This isn't finished," he said. Then he left. Elena stood frozen for several seconds after he was gone. Her heart wouldn't slow down. Not from fear. Not exactly. From the terrifying realization that Daniel Harrington, her enemy, her rival, the man who made her college life a battlefield, might have been running from something much deeper than hatred. And that meant this war wasn't just professional. It was personal. She sat down, forcing herself to breathe. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Marina Wells, the interior designer, the only person in the building who somehow seemed to know everything. "Marina, I saw the end of that meeting through the glass. The tension in there could power the entire city. Tell me everything." Elena stared at the message. Then she dropped her head into her hands and whispered to herself, "I am in so much trouble." Because she could handle disrespect. She could handle discrimination. She could handle arrogant men trying to test her. What she didn't know how to handle was Daniel Harrington looking at her like she mattered. And worse, Daniel Harrington almost saying something he couldn't take back. The truth that shatters everything. By the start of the third week, the office no longer felt neutral. It felt like a pressure cooker. Elena could sense it the moment she stepped off the elevator each morning. The glances that lingered a second too long, the conversations that went quiet when she passed, the subtle shift in energy whenever she entered a room where Daniel already was. People were watching. They always did when a woman stood her ground against power and didn't flinch. And now they were watching something else too. The tension between Elena Carter and Daniel Harrington had become impossible to ignore. It lived in the silences between sentences. In the way he paused when she spoke. In the way she instinctively squared her shoulders whenever he entered a room. It was sharp, electric, dangerous, and everyone felt it. What nobody saw was how quickly admiration could turn into resentment. It started with whispers. "She's overruling engineering now. She's just a consultant. Why does Harrington listen to her? Must be nice to have his attention." Elena heard it all. She always did. Women learned early how to listen without reacting. Still, the comments burrowed under her skin. By Thursday, the first open challenge came. The project's financial review meeting was supposed to be routine. Budget projections, long-term ROI, risk mitigation. Elena had prepared her sustainability cost-benefit breakdown, confident it would reinforce the project's strength. Instead, it turned into a firing squad. Midway through the presentation, a senior financial analyst named Mark Delaney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "These numbers seem optimistic," he said, not bothering to hide the skepticism in his voice. "Sustainability projections often do." Elena held her ground. "They're based on peer-reviewed studies and real-world case." "I'm just saying," Mark interrupted, "we've seen consultants oversell environmental benefits before. Especially ones fresh off academic theory." The room went quiet. Elena felt heat rise in her chest, not embarrassment but anger. Before she could respond, Daniel spoke. "Mark," he said evenly, "let her finish." Mark shrugged. "Of course. Just raising concerns." Elena finished her presentation without another interruption, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted. After the meeting, she overheard Mark speaking in low tones near the coffee station. "Doesn't hurt that she and Harrington go way back," he said. "Explains a lot." That night, Elena didn't sleep. By morning, the consequences arrived. Daniel called her into his office just after 8 a.m. The blinds were drawn. The air felt heavier than usual. "Close the door," he said. She did. Daniel leaned against his desk, jaw tight. "The investors received an anonymous report last night." Elena's stomach dropped. "What kind of report?" "One that questions the environmental viability of the Riverside project," he said. "Specifically your projections." The words hit her like a punch. "What?" she whispered. "That's impossible." Daniel slid a folder across the desk. Her hands shook as she opened it. Her work, twisted. Charts stripped of context. Data selectively cropped. Conclusions rewritten to look reckless instead of rigorous. It was her voice, her research, weaponized against her. "This makes me look incompetent," Elena said hoarsely. "It makes the project look doomed." "I know," Daniel said. "Who did this?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Elena," he said slowly, "I need you to prepare a full rebuttal. We have 24 hours before the investors meet." She swallowed hard. "Do you think it was me?" The question hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Daniel looked at her, truly looked at her. "No," he said without hesitation. "Not for a second." Something in her chest cracked open. "Then why does this feel like déjà vu?" she asked softly. Daniel closed his eyes. "Because 10 years ago, a lie like this had torn them apart. They worked late into the night." Elena rebuilt her case from the ground up, layering context, evidence, comparisons, peer studies. Daniel stayed, silent support, bringing her files, clearing distractions, guarding her space like a shield. At one point, around midnight, Elena finally broke. "You never asked me," she said quietly, staring at her screen. "Back then?" Daniel stiffened. "I should have. You assumed I was capable of betrayal because it was easier than trusting me." Daniel stood slowly and walked closer. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of how much you mattered." Elena turned to him, stunned. "I didn't hate you," he continued. "I hated myself for not being brave enough to ask the truth." Tears blurred her vision. Before she could respond, the office door opened. A woman stood there, pale and trembling. Rachel Monroe. Elena recognized her instantly. College. Same program. Same competition year. The woman who had always hovered on the edges, watching, listening. "I need to talk," Rachel said, voice shaking. "Now." Daniel's expression darkened. "This isn't the time." "Yes, it is," Rachel said, stepping inside. "I sent the report." Silence. Elena felt like the floor disappeared beneath her. "What?" Daniel said sharply. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I sent it, and I sent something else too. 10 years ago." Elena's breath caught. Rachel turned to her. "I leaked Daniel's competition files in college. I framed you." The words landed like a bomb. 10 years of anger. Distance. Pain. A lie. "I was jealous," Rachel sobbed. "Of both of you. Your brilliance. Your connection. I wanted to ruin it." Daniel looked like he'd been struck. "You let us destroy each other," he said quietly. Rachel nodded. "I couldn't live with it anymore." Security escorted her out. The room felt hollow after. Elena sank into a chair, shaking. Daniel knelt in front of her. "I am so sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I should have trusted you." Elena laughed through tears. "We both should have fought harder." They sat there, two people mourning a decade stolen by silence. Then Daniel took her hands. "This time," he said, "we don't run." Elena nodded. Because justice had finally surfaced. And karma was just getting started. When power shifts and karma strikes. The morning of the investor summit arrived like a reckoning. Elena stood in front of the bathroom mirror long before sunrise, staring at her reflection as if she were meeting herself for the first time. The woman looking back at her wasn't the nervous graduate who once felt invisible in crowded lecture halls. She wasn't the underestimated consultant fighting for scraps of respect. This woman had survived lies, sabotage, humiliation, and silence. This woman knew the truth. She dressed with intention. Black blazer, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back not for softness but for clarity. Not armor. Authority. When she entered the hotel conference hall, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The investors were already seated, men and women with practiced skepticism, sharp eyes, and the kind of influence that could elevate or erase careers with a nod. Daniel stood near the presentation screen, posture straight, jaw set. When he saw her, something changed in his expression. Not dominance, not control. Respect. They stood side by side, not as rivals, not as employer and consultant, but as equals. The lead investor, Charles Whitman, leaned forward. "Before we proceed," he said, "we'd like clarity on the discrepancies raised in the anonymous report." Elena didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. "For the sake of transparency," she said calmly, "the report you received was deliberately manipulated. Critical context was removed. Conclusions were altered." A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel spoke next. "The source of that report has been identified. And the false accusation from 10 years ago, against Ms. Carter, has also been formally confessed." Eyes turned sharply. Elena continued. "What matters now isn't the attempt to sabotage this project. It's whether truth and integrity still hold value in decision-making." She activated the presentation. What followed wasn't just a defense, it was a dismantling. Elena rebuilt the narrative with precision. Every accusation countered with data. Every doubt addressed with evidence. Every distorted chart replaced with full context. She spoke with calm authority, not pleading, not defensive, confident. The room listened. By the time she finished, silence filled the hall. Whitman leaned back slowly. "Ms. Carter," he said, "this may be the most thorough, transparent presentation we've seen." Another investor nodded. "If anything, this confirms the strength of the project." Approval followed. Funding secured. But karma wasn't done. 2 days later, the internal audit concluded. Mark Delaney, the analyst who'd publicly undermined Elena, was exposed. Emails revealed he'd circulated the false report internally before it ever reached investors, hoping to weaken her credibility and position himself as indispensable. He was terminated quietly. Rachel Monroe faced legal consequences for intellectual property theft and defamation. The whispers stopped. The respect didn't. In meetings now, people waited for Elena to speak. Her name carried weight. One afternoon, Daniel called an all-hands leadership meeting. When the room settled, he spoke plainly. "I want to make something clear," he said. "Ms. Carter's work saved this project. And the disrespect she faced here will not happen again." Then he did something no one expected. "I'm offering her a permanent executive role as Director of Sustainable Development." The room erupted. Elena froze. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't planned for this. But she had earned it. Later that evening, Daniel found her standing by the window overlooking the city. "You don't have to accept," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "I know." He stepped closer. "Whatever you decide. I'm proud of you." She turned to him. "You finally listened." "Yes," he said. "And I won't stop." For the first time, the war between them was truly over. What remained was possibility. The respect she earned, the future she chose. Victory is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause the way people imagine. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on an ordinary morning, when you realize you're no longer bracing for impact every time you walk into a room. Elena noticed it on a Tuesday. No whispered conversations stopped when she passed. No eyes followed her with doubt. People greeted her by name, not politely but confidently, like she belonged exactly where she was. Because now she did. Her new office overlooked the river. Glass walls. Natural light. A seat at the leadership table that once felt impossibly out of reach. The title on the door read, Director of Sustainable Development, Elena Carter. She rested her palm against the glass for a moment, grounding herself. 10 years ago she had been dismissed as too intense, too competitive, too much. Now, those same traits were the reason the company trusted her with its future. But professional success wasn't the hardest part to process. Daniel Harrington was. They worked differently now. No silent wars. No strategic tension disguised as professionalism. When they disagreed, they debated openly. When one was right, the other acknowledged it, without pride, without defensiveness. Respect had replaced rivalry. And something else had grown in its place. One evening, long after the office emptied, Elena found Daniel still at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, staring at his screen without really seeing it. "You're doing that thing," she said softly. He glanced up. "What thing?" "Thinking yourself in circles." Daniel exhaled and leaned back. "I keep wondering how much damage could have been avoided if I'd trusted you sooner." Elena crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk. "We were young. We were scared. We made bad choices." He looked at her, eyes unguarded. "I don't want to waste any more time." Neither did she. But this wasn't a movie. There were rules, boundaries, complications. So Elena said the hardest thing first. "I need to know that whatever this becomes," she said, "it's because we choose it, not because of history, guilt, or proximity." Daniel nodded immediately. Agreed. They took it slow. Coffee outside the office. Long walks where conversation mattered more than tension. Laughter that felt earned, not forced. And one night, standing under city lights reflected on the river, Daniel finally reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. The press covered the Riverside project when construction began. They called it visionary. A model for modern cities. But the story that quietly spread inside the company mattered more. About the woman who was underestimated and refused to shrink. About the man who learned that power means nothing without humility. About how truth eventually rises no matter how long it's buried. On opening day, Elena stood on the platform overlooking the completed site. Daniel stood beside her, not in front, not behind. When the applause came, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt whole. Because karma hadn't destroyed anyone. It had corrected the imbalance. It had restored dignity. And it had given her something far better than revenge. A future built on respect.